grand ballroom of the Winslow estate glittered under 100 crystal chandeliers. Laughter echoed through the hall as men in black tuxedos and women in elegant gowns moved gracefully between gold-rimmed tables. It was the biggest charity event of the year, hosted by Clara Winslow, the only daughter of one of the richest families in the city. She was beautiful, confident, and known for her playful arrogance. Everyone admired her charm, but few dared to challenge her sharp tongue. In one quiet corner, away from all the music and chatter, stood Ethan Cole, a janitor. He wore a plain blue shirt under a navy apron, his hands covered with yellow cleaning gloves. While others enjoyed champagne and conversation, he quietly wiped a spill from the marble floor near the grand piano. No one noticed him. To them, he was invisible, just another worker blending into the background of wealth and privilege. The event was supposed to feature a world-famous pianist who would perform a piece Clara had personally requested. It was meant to be the highlight of the evening, a performance to impress her elite guests. But just moments before the show, one of the organizers whispered something into Clara's ear. Her smile faded for a second, then she laughed lightly to hide her irritation. The pianist had called in sick. The stage was empty, and the guests were beginning to whisper among themselves. "Oh, this is disappointing," said one man in a black bow tie. "Without music, it's just another boring party," another joked. Clara tried to keep the mood alive. "Don't worry," she said with a teasing smile. "Maybe one of you can play." The crowd laughed, shaking their heads. Clara looked around dramatically, pretending to search for a volunteer. That's when her eyes landed on Ethan, who was still standing near the piano, holding his mop awkwardly. A mischievous sparkle lit up her face. "Woy, out there!" she called out, pointing at him. The room went silent as everyone turned to look at the janitor. Ethan froze, unsure what to do. "Yes, you," she said again, walking toward him in her bright red gown. "You look like a man with hidden talents. Tell me, can you play the piano?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, ma'am, I'm just a janitor?" She interrupted with a laugh. "Oh, come now, don't be shy. Let's make this fun." The guests chuckled. Some even pulled out their phones, ready to record the amusing moment. Clara turned to the crowd and said playfully, "Tell you what, if this gentleman plays the piece I requested, I'll marry him." The hall exploded with laughter. It was a joke, of course. No one could imagine a billionaire heiress marrying a janitor. Clara smiled proudly, thinking she had turned the awkward situation into a light-hearted joke. But Ethan didn't laugh. His face was calm, though his eyes carried something deeper. A quiet strength, maybe even hurt. He looked at the piano for a long moment, then back at Clara. "What song would you like me to play?" he asked, softly. His voice was calm, but confident, surprising everyone. The crowd fell quiet. Clara blinked, a little thrown off by his response. "You're serious?" she said, smirking. "Fine then. Play Moonlight Sonata, if you even know what that is." Her words dripped with sarcasm, but she was curious now. The audience whispered among themselves, some laughing, some waiting to see how badly this would go. Ethan slowly removed his gloves, folding them neatly beside the piano. He straightened his shirt and walked toward the bench. The guests exchanged amused looks, expecting an awkward disaster. Clara crossed her arms, half amused, half intrigued. The chandelier light shimmered above him as he sat down. His rough hands hovered above the glossy keys of the grand piano. For a few seconds, there as only silence, the kind that makes people hold their breath. Ethan closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and placed his fingers gently on the keys. No one expected what would happen next. At that moment, even though no sound had yet come from the piano, something in the air changed. Clara, still smiling, felt a strange chill, as if the joke she had started was no longer funny. Around her, the laughter had died down. Every eye in the room was fixed on the janitor at the piano. Inside Ethan's mind, memories flashed. Of long nights in his tiny apartment, practicing on an old keyboard, of a mother who once told him that music was his gift, of the dreams he had given up when life became too hard. Now, surrounded by people who thought he was nothing, he felt a fire rising inside him. Not anger, but quiet determination. He had nothing to prove, and yet he was about to show them everything. As his fingers began to move, the room would soon fall completely silent. The laughter that began as a cruel joke would turn into awe. But for now, in that fragile electric moment, between Clara's teasing smile and Ethan's steady breath, the story truly began. It was a challenge that wasn't planned, a spark born out of pride and chance. A rich woman's careless dare and a janitor's calm courage would soon collide in a way that none of them could ever forget. And though no one knew it yet, that one sentence, "Play this and I'll marry you," would change both their lives forever. Ethan's hands rested on the piano keys. For a few seconds, no one spoke, no one moved. The air in the grand ballroom felt heavy, filled with curiosity and hidden laughter. Everyone expected a disaster. A few broken notes, maybe some clumsy pressing of keys, followed by more jokes and laughter. After all, what could a janitor possibly know about playing a grand piano? Clara Winslow leaned against the piano, smiling proudly, confident that her little challenge would remain a funny story to tell later. Her red gown shimmered under the golden light, and her friends whispered behind her. "This should be good," one man said softly. "He probably doesn't even know which key is which," a woman giggled. Ethan sat still, eyes closed. The sound of their laughter didn't bother him. He had heard it all before. People underestimating him, looking past him, treating him like part of the furniture. But tonight felt different. Something inside him whispered, "Play." He took a deep breath, and his fingers began to move. The first note was soft, so delicate that many thought it was accidental. Then came another, then another, each one smoother, more certain, more beautiful. The room slowly grew silent. The whispers stopped. The laughter disappeared. Even the servers froze, holding trays mid-air. The melody of Moonlight Sonata floated through the ballroom like a ghost from another time. The grand piano's notes shimmered against the marble walls, wrapping the guests in sound so pure it made their hearts ache. The janitor's fingers danced, light, confident, graceful, as if the piano had been waiting for his touch all night. Clara's smile faded. Her eyes widened slightly, her breath caught. She had heard this piece 100 times before, performed by professionals in grand halls across the world. But never like this. There was something raw, something alive in the way Ethan played. A kind of quiet pain that spoke louder than any words. The crowd began to lean closer. The old man sitting near the bar blinked away tears. A woman covered her mouth, her eyes shining. Even the people who knew nothing about music could feel the emotion pouring out of every note. Ethan wasn't just playing, he was remembering. In his mind, he saw his mother again, sitting in a small room, smiling as he practiced on a broken keyboard they had found at a thrift shop. He remembered the nights he played softly so she could sleep, the nights he played harder to drown out the pain of hunger and loss. Every chord carried a memory, every sound a piece of his story. When the melody reached its highest point, the sound filled the entire hall like light spilling through glass. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. Time froze. There was only him, the piano, and the sound of a man who had lived through silence too long. Clara's hand trembled as she rested it on the piano lid. Her eyes followed his hands, the same hands she had laughed at moments ago, now creating magic. Her heart pounded, not with embarrassment, but with something she couldn't name. Admiration, surprise, guilt. She glanced at the guests around her. No one was smiling anymore. Some were crying quietly. Others just stared, stunned by what they were hearing. The same people who had laughed at the janitor now watched him with awe. As the final notes began to fade, Ethan's hands slowed. The last sound echoed softly like a whisper that refused to die. Then came silence. Deep, complete silence. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. It felt almost wrong to breathe. Then, one person began to clap. Another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause. Loud, honest, emotional applause that shook the chandeliers. People stood up from their seats. Some cheered. Some cried. It was no longer a party. It was a moment of truth that touched every heart there. Clara stood frozen. The applause washed over her, but she couldn't take her eyes off Ethan. He looked calm, almost detached, as if none of this surprised him. He didn't bow or smile proudly. He simply stood, gave a small nod, and stepped away from the piano. "Wait," Clara whispered, but he didn't hear her. Or maybe he did, and chose not to stop. He picked up his yellow gloves and apron from where he had placed them, slipping them back on as the applause continued. The contrast was striking. The man who had just played like a genius now looked once again like an ordinary worker. The crowd watched in silence as he walked toward the exit. At the door, he paused for a second and looked back. His eyes met Clara's. There was no anger in his face, no pride, only quiet dignity. Then he turned and left. Clara's throat tightened. For the first time that night, she had nothing clever to say. Her guests whispered around her, asking who he was, how he knew the piece, where he learned to play. But Clara didn't answer. She just stood there, her heart still echoing with the sound of the music. The same piano she had pointed to with laughter now felt sacred. The same man she had mocked now haunted her thoughts. And as the guests began to leave, she realized something that made her chest ache. She hadn't even asked his name. The next morning, the Winslow mansion was quiet. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, bouncing off the polished marble floors. The chandeliers, which had sparkled the night before, now hung still in the calm daylight. But even with all its beauty, the mansion felt strangely empty, as if something important had been left behind. Clara Winslow sat at the same grand piano from the night before. Her red gown was gone. Now she wore a plain white robe, her hair loosely tied back. The piano keys were still warm in her memory. She touched them gently, remembering the sound, the music that had silenced an entire ballroom. She could still see his face, the janitor, the man she had laughed at, Ethan Cole. At least that's what she learned his name was from one of the staff members that morning. He hadn't come in for his shift. No one knew where he went after leaving the event. Some said he walked down the long driveway without a word into the cold night, leaving behind the sound that no one could forget. Clara pressed one key softly. The note echoed, but it felt empty. How? She whispered to herself. How could someone like him play like that? It didn't make sense. A man who cleaned floors, who wore rubber gloves and an apron, playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata like he was born to do it. It wasn't just skill. It was emotion. Deep, painful, powerful emotion. That kind of feeling couldn't be faked. Her father, Mr. Winslow, walked into the room holding a newspaper. He was a tall, serious man with silver hair and a calm authority that filled any room he entered. I heard about last night, he said, sitting down across from her. You made quite a scene. Clara frowned. I didn't mean to. You never do, he replied with a small smile. But you always manage to cause one. He folded the newspaper neatly and looked at her. So, tell me about this janitor musician. Clara sighed. His name is Ethan. I don't know anything else. But he played like I've never heard anyone play before. Her voice softened. It was like he was telling a story through the piano. Her father leaned back, thoughtful. Maybe he was, he said. People carry stories you can't see, Clara. Sometimes, those who have the least are the ones who feel the most. She looked down, ashamed. I made fun of him, she said quietly. I thought it would be funny. Everyone was watching, and I just wanted to keep the mood light. She shook her head. But I was cruel. Her father didn't answer right away. After a moment, he said gently, "You can't undo what's been done, but you can learn from it." Clara nodded, her mind already made up. I need to find him. Later that day, she drove into the city. The Winslow limousine, usually a symbol of her power, now felt too big, too empty. Through the tinted windows, she saw the world she rarely noticed. Small shops, old buildings, people rushing to work. Somewhere among them, she thought, was the man who had changed everything with a single song. After a few hours, she stopped near a small cafe close to T, the maintenance district where the estate's workers lived. She got out, feeling out of place in her elegant coat. Inside the cafe, she spotted a familiar face. Mrs. Dalton, the head housekeeper. "Miss Winslow?" the woman said, surprised. "You here?" "I'm looking for Ethan," Clara said quickly. "Do you know where he lives?" Mrs. Dalton hesitated. "I'm not sure I should say, ma'am." "Please," Clara said softly. "I just need to talk to him." The woman studied her face for a moment. Then she sighed and scribbled an address on a napkin. "He's a good man," she said. "Just don't hurt him again." Clara nodded, clutching the napkin tightly. Ethan's home was a tiny apartment above a laundromat. The paint on the walls was peeling, and the hallway smelled faintly of detergent. When she knocked, there was no answer. She tried again. Finally, the door opened just a crack, and Ethan looked out. For a second, they just stared at each other. He looked tired but calm, wearing a simple gray shirt. His eyes were kind, but guarded. "Miss Winslow," he said quietly, "what are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," she said honestly. "What I did last night was wrong. I embarrassed you in front of everyone. You didn't deserve that." Ethan didn't speak. He just looked at her, waiting. "I don't understand," she continued softly. "How did you learn to play like that?" He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "My mother taught me. She used to say music was the only thing that made life beautiful, even when everything else was falling apart." Clara's chest tightened. "You're incredible, Ethan. You could be performing in concert halls, not cleaning floors." He shrugged. Life doesn't always go as planned. There was silence between them, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. Clara looked around his small apartment. On a wooden table sat an old, dusty keyboard. She walked over and touched it gently. "You still play?" "Sometimes," he said, "when the world gets too loud." She turned to him, her voice trembling. "Last night, you made me see something I've never seen before. I saw what real talent looks like, what humility looks like." She hesitated, then added softly, "And what I look like when I forget to be kind." Ethan's expression softened. "You were just being human," he said quietly. "People laugh when they don't understand, but it's okay." She looked at him, eyes shining. "No, it's not okay," she whispered. "But maybe I can make it better." For the first time, Ethan smiled. A small, genuine smile. That evening, when Clara returned home, she sat at the grand piano again. She placed her fingers on the keys but didn't play. Instead, she whispered to herself, "He played like a genius, and I almost missed it because I couldn't see past the gloves." And for the first time in her life, Clara Winslow, the woman who had everything, felt truly humbled. The following week, the story of the mysterious janitor pianist had spread everywhere. People couldn't stop talking about what had happened at the Winslow Charity Gala. Some guests told the story at breakfast tables, others at business meetings. Social media was full of short clips someone had secretly recorded that night. A man in cleaning gloves playing the piano like a master. No one knew his name, but everyone was talking about him. Who was he? Was he really a janitor? Where did he learn to play like that? Clara Winslow watched the videos in silence. The comments below were endless. Thousands of strangers moved by his performance. Some called him the hidden maestro. Others said his music had made them cry. Clara smiled sadly. They're right, she thought. He deserves to be seen. For days, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Every time she walked past the piano, she remembered his calm face, his quiet strength, and how her laughter had turned into awe. She had apologized once, but something inside her told her that wasn't enough. He didn't just deserve an apology. He deserved a chance. One afternoon, she called a meeting with her company's charity board. We're holding another event, she said firmly. But this time, it won't be for show. It'll be for talent. Real talent. Her assistant looked confused. What kind of event, ma'am? A music showcase, Clara said. For people like him, the ones nobody sees. 2 weeks later, Clara found herself back in that same cafe near Ethan's apartment. She wore simple clothes this time. No diamonds, no designer gown, just jeans and a sweater. She saw him sitting at a corner table, quietly reading a small book. Ethan, she said softly, walking over. He looked up, surprised, but not unkind. Miss Winslow. Just Clara, she said quickly, smiling. Please. He gave a small nod. She sat down across from him, holding a folder. I have a proposal, she began. I want you to play again, at the new charity concert next week, not as a janitor this time, but as the performer. Ethan blinked, stunned. Me? No, Clara, that's not... I'm serious, she interrupted. People already know your story. They've seen the video. They want to hear you play again. You could inspire so many. He looked down at his hands. You don't understand. That night, I didn't play for them. I played because I couldn't hold it in anymore. Music is the only thing that makes me feel alive. But I'm not looking for fame. I know, Clara said gently. That's exactly why you deserve it. You played from your heart, not for attention. That's what makes it special. He was quiet for a moment. Why are you doing this? He asked softly. She met his eyes. Because I was wrong about you, about people like you. I want to make it right. Let me do this, not for me, but for you. Ethan studied her face for a long time. Her voice didn't sound like the spoiled heiress from that night. It sounded real, honest, almost pleading. Finally, he sighed and nodded. All right, he said quietly. I'll do it. Clara's eyes lit up. You will? He smiled faintly. Just don't make another marriage joke this time. Clara laughed. A real, warm laugh. I promise. The night of the concert arrived. The hall was packed. Not with billionaires this time, but with people from all walks of life. Students, teachers, cleaners, workers, and a few wealthy guests who had come out of curiosity. A banner above the stage read, Hidden Voices, a concert for the unseen. Clara sat in the front row, her heart pounding. As the lights dimmed, Ethan walked onto the stage in a simple black suit. The audience clapped politely at first, unsure what to expect. He sat at the piano, took a breath, and began to play. The first note shimmered through the hall like a wave of light. It was not Moonlight Sonata this time. It was his own melody, something original, something deeply personal. Each note carried emotion, pain, hope, love, loss. People closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. It felt like he was telling a story through music, a story of struggle, kindness, and quiet triumph. Clara couldn't stop the tears from rolling down her cheeks. Around her, others wept too. Even those who didn't know his past could feel the truth in his music. It wasn't perfect by technique. It was perfect by heart. When the song ended, silence filled the hall again. Then came the applause. Thunderous, heartfelt, unstoppable. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some shouted his name. Ethan bowed slightly, his eyes glistening. For a moment he looked directly at Clara. She stood too, clapping harder than anyone else, her heart full. In that instant, she understood something she never had before. Greatness doesn't need a stage. It just needs courage. After the concert, Clara met him backstage. She wanted to say so many things, but all that came out was, "You were unbelievable." Ethan smiled. "I just played what I felt." She laughed softly. "That's what makes it unbelievable." For a moment, they stood there, quiet. There was no distance now between Billionaire and Janitor. Only two people connected by music, respect, and something unspoken. As they left the stage together, cameras flashed, reporters called out, but Clara didn't care. The real story wasn't about fame or money. It was about a man who reminded the world that talent has no uniform, and a woman who learned that humility is the finest kind of wealth. After the concert, Ethan's name spread everywhere. Newspapers called him the janitor who played like a master. Music critics couldn't believe that someone with no formal job in music could perform with such emotion. Television reporters tried to reach him for interviews, but Ethan stayed quiet. He didn't want fame. He wanted peace. Clara Winslow, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about him. Not in a romantic way yet, but in a way that came from respect, from genuine curiosity. Who was this man who carried so much talent but lived such a quiet life? She decided to visit him again, this time without any cameras or attention. It was a Sunday morning when she knocked on his apartment door. Ethan opened it, surprised but smiling softly. "You again?" he said with a gentle laugh. Clara smiled. "You didn't return my calls." "I've been busy cleaning," he said playfully. "Fame doesn't pay the rent, you know." She chuckled. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside and she walked in. The small apartment was tidy, simple and warm. The same old keyboard sat by the window, sunlight glinting off its faded keys. On the wall hung a single framed photograph. A woman with kind eyes, smiling softly. "Your mother?" Clara asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, she was everything." He poured her a cup of tea and sat across from her. Clara could feel a quiet sadness around him. Not bitterness, but something deep, like a wound that never truly healed. "Tell me about her," she said gently. Ethan looked at the photo for a long time before speaking. She was a piano teacher. Not famous, but she loved music more than anyone I've ever met. She taught me everything I know, every note, every feeling. When I was a kid, we didn't have much, but she made sure we always had music. Clara listened silently, her heart heavy. "When I was 16, Ethan continued softly, she got sick, really sick. She couldn't teach anymore, and we didn't have insurance. I worked wherever I could, cleaning, delivering, fixing things, just to pay for her medicine. I even sold my first piano." He stopped, his voice trembling slightly. "The night before she died, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, 'Promise me, Ethan, you'll never stop playing, even if the world stops listening.'" Clara's eyes glistened. "You kept that promise," she whispered. Ethan smiled sadly. "I tried, but life doesn't wait for dreams. After she passed, I couldn't afford school. I needed a job. So, I cleaned. I fixed things. I played only when I was alone." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of traffic outside. Then Clara spoke softly. "All this time, you've been carrying that music inside you." He nodded. It was the only thing I had left of her. Clara looked down at her cup, her voice filled with emotion. "You know, people like me, we have a very thing, and yet, sometimes we feel empty. But you have so little, and yet, your music fills every heart that hears it." Ethan smiled faintly. That's because I play what's real. Pain, love, hope. Those don't need money to exist. She met his eyes. You're right, but maybe it's time the world sees you for who you really are. He chuckled softly. A janitor with a broken keyboard? No, she said with conviction. A man who turned pain into beauty. They both fell silent again, lost in thought. The sunlight shifted, painting the room in soft gold. Clara glanced at the photograph again and whispered, "She'd be proud of you, Ethan." He swallowed hard. I hope so. Later that evening, as Clara drove home, she couldn't stop replaying his words. Every note he had played now had meaning. Every sound came from a story, from loss, from love. She realized that true greatness isn't loud or shiny. It's quiet, humble, and born from struggle. When she reached home, her father was sitting in the study reading a magazine. He looked up as she entered. "You've been visiting him again?" he asked knowingly. Clara nodded. "He's not just a musician, Father. He's something more. You should hear the way he talks about life." Mr. Winslow smiled faintly. "Maybe you're finally learning that wealth isn't the same as worth." Clara sat across from him, thoughtful. He said something that stuck with me. "I play what's real." Her father nodded slowly. "That's why it touched you. Because we spend too much time chasing what's false." Clara looked out the window. He lost everything, and still, he shines. Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone at his small keyboard. His fingers rested lightly on the keys, playing a soft melody, one his mother had written for him when he was a child. He smiled as he played, remembering her voice, her laughter, her encouragement. He didn't notice the tears on his cheeks until the final note faded. He looked at the photo on the wall. "I kept my promise, Mom," he whispered. "They finally heard me." The room was small, the world outside still indifferent. But in that moment, Ethan didn't feel invisible anymore. Someone had seen him. Someone had believed in him. And though he didn't know it yet, his life, the quiet janitor's life, was about to change forever. Days passed after their conversation about Ethan's past, but Clara couldn't get it out of her mind. Every word, every emotion in his story stayed with her like a quiet echo. She had met hundreds of people in her privileged life, powerful businessmen, famous artists, politicians, but none of them had moved her the way Ethan Cole did. He had no money, no fame, no reason to trust her. Yet he carried something she had never known before, truth. She realized that her apology, though sincere, had been only words. What Ethan deserved was understanding. He had spent his life being invisible while she had spent hers being seen too much. Maybe, she thought, life had brought them together to teach her something she could never learn in her golden cage. That morning, Clara walked into the Winslow Foundation office. Her assistant looked up from her desk, startled. Clara was rarely this early. "Good morning, Miss Winslow," she said politely. "Morning," Clara replied, setting her purse down. "Cancel my lunch meeting with the investors. I have something more important to do." The assistant blinked. "More important than investors?" So, Ara smiled faintly. "Much more." That afternoon, Clara drove to the maintenance wing of her estate, a place she had rarely visited before. It was where all the staff worked, gardeners, cleaners, cooks, drivers. The long hallway smelled faintly of soap and polish. As she walked through, the workers stopped and stared. No one had ever seen her here before. "Miss Winslow?" one of the cleaners asked, confused. "Did something happen?" Clara smiled kindly. "No, I'm just visiting." Ethan wasn't there, but his co-workers told her he was fixing a broken lamp in the back garden. She thanked them and followed the stone path outside. There he was, crouched near a lamppost, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly messy, screwdriver in hand. The sunlight fell on his face, highlighting the quiet focus in his eyes. For a moment, Clara just watched him. He looked peaceful, at home in his work. "Need help?" she asked softly. Ethan turned, surprised. Clara, what are you doing here? She smiled, walking closer. Apologizing again. He chuckled lightly, standing up. You already did that. Not properly, she said. That night I laughed at you in front of everyone. I made you a joke, Ethan. And yet, you gave me the most beautiful moment of my life. That's not something I can just say sorry for once and forget. He looked at her quietly, his usual calm expression softening. Clara, I don't hold it against you. People make mistakes. I've made my share too. But I want to do better, she said quickly. Not just for you, for everyone I've ever looked down on without realizing it. Ethan crossed his arms, half smiling. That's a big promise. I mean it, she said firmly. I've started a new project, Hidden Voices. It's going to be a scholarship fund for people like you. People with talent, but no opportunities. You'll be the face of it. He blinked in surprise. Me? I don't know if I'm the right person for that. You're perfect for it, she said, because you know what it's like to fight for your dream when no one's watching. He smiled faintly. You really don't give up, do you? Clara laughed softly. Not when something feels right. They both stood there for a moment, the silence between them gentle, not awkward. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. Ethan finally spoke, his tone thoughtful. You know, when I played that night, I didn't care who was listening. I wasn't trying to prove anything. But when you apologized, when you looked at me not as a janitor but as a person, that meant more than all the applause in the world. Clara's eyes softened. You made me see life differently, Ethan. I thought I understood the world because I had money, but I was blind. He shook his head gently. You weren't blind. Just looking in the wrong direction. She smiled, touched by his kindness. Maybe you should be the one running my foundation. Ethan laughed quietly. No thanks. I think I'll stick to fixing things. Well, she teased. You've already fixed me a little. He raised an eyebrow. I didn't know you were broken. Clara looked away, her smile fading slightly. Everyone is in some way. Some just hide it better than others. Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he walked to the piano bench that sat under a tree in the garden, a place the staff sometimes used during breaks. Come here, he said gently. Clara followed, curious. He sat down and began to play something soft, not classical, not complex, but warm and gentle, like a lullaby. The notes floated through the air, mixing with the rustle of leaves. It was a song of peace, of forgiveness. This one's for you, he said softly, for learning to listen. Clara felt her eyes sting with tears. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside him, letting the music speak for both of them. When the song ended, she whispered, You make everything sound like hope. Ethan looked at her, smiling. Hope is all I've ever played for. They sat there quietly, by side, a billionaire and a janitor, two people from different worlds, bound by something simple and human, understanding. Later that evening, as Clara drove away from the estate, she rolled down her window and looked up at the fading sunset. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel superior or small, just real. She whispered to herself, He forgave me, and I'll never forget that. And somewhere behind her, in the garden under the lamplight he had just fixed, Ethan played one more soft melody, a song that carried her name in every note. Weeks passed, and life began to change, not just for Ethan, but for Clara too. The Hidden Voices project had become real. Clara didn't just talk about it, she worked on it every day. For the first time in her life, she wasn't attending fancy parties or high society lunches. Instead, she was sitting in small community centers, meeting young musicians, artists, and dreamers who had been forgotten by the world. Everywhere she went, she told Ethan's story, not with pride, but with gratitude. He reminded me, she would say, that talent doesn't need permission to exist. The media loved it. They called it the Winslow Redemption. But for Clara, it wasn't about publicity. It was about truth. She had seen real beauty in a place where others saw only dust, and she wanted the world to see it too. Ethan, on the other hand, continued working at the estate, but his world was no longer the same. Every morning, people stopped him on the street, thanking him for his music. Children wanted to learn piano because of him. Local music schools asked him to give lessons, but he never let it go to his head. He still fixed lamps, cleaned hallways, and helped anyone who needed him. One evening, Clara found him in the ballroom again, sitting at the piano, playing softly to himself. "You still play after work?" she asked with a smile. He looked up and grinned. "You still work after hours?" She laughed. "Touché." Clara sat beside him, watching his fingers glide across the keys. "Do you ever think about performing again? Professionally, I mean?" Ethan hesitated. "Sometimes. But music isn't about stages or applause for me anymore. It's about peace. Playing reminds me that I survived." Clara nodded. "You're right. But sometimes sharing that peace can help others survive too." He smiled faintly. "You always find a way to convince me of something." She laughed softly. "Maybe because you always deserve more than you think." There was a quiet pause between them, a peaceful one. The room glowed with golden light from the chandelier above, the same one that had witnessed their first meeting. Laughter, mockery, and then silence. Now, it felt different. Warmer. 2 months later, Hidden Voices hosted its first grand concert. Not in a mansion, but in a public park, open to everyone. The stage was simple, decorated with fairy lights and flowers. There were no VIP seats, no expensive decorations. Just people, music, and hope. Clara stood on stage, microphone in hand, addressing the crowd. "Tonight is not about fame," she said clearly. "It's about the power of belief, in others and in ourselves." She paused, looking out over the hundreds of people gathered. "And none of this would exist without one man. A man who reminded me what real music and real humanity sound like." She turned toward Ethan, who was sitting quietly by the piano. The audience clapped, cheering his name. Ethan walked to the piano, humble as ever, and began to play. But this time he wasn't alone. Around him stood young musicians from small neighborhoods, violinists, singers, guitar players, all given a chance through Hidden Voices. Together they played a melody he had composed himself, a piece called The Unseen Symphony. The sound was breathtaking, a blend of classical grace and raw emotion. Every note felt live, filled with heart and honesty. The audience swayed, clapped softly, even cried. It wasn't just music. It was a story told without words. Clara stood off stage, watching him with quiet pride. In that moment, she didn't see a janitor. She didn't see a charity case or a viral sensation. She saw a man who refused to give up, and she felt lucky just to have witnessed it. After the performance, people rushed to thank Ethan. Cameras flashed, microphones surrounded him. But he smiled politely, saying only, "I just played what I felt. The rest belongs to all of you." Later, as the crowd dispersed, Clara found him sitting alone by the piano again, staring at the stars above the park. "You did it," she said softly, sitting beside him. "We did it," he corrected gently. She smiled. "You've changed everything, Ethan. Not just this project. Me too." He looked at her, thoughtful. "You changed too. You listen now. You see people." Clara chuckled. "Guess we both did some growing." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the faint laughter of children playing nearby. Then Ethan said, "You know, I used to think the world didn't care about people like me. But maybe the world just needs someone willing to care first." Clara looked at him, her voice soft. You were that someone? He smiled. No, you were. You turned one apology into hope for so many others. She looked away, blinking back tears. I couldn't have done it without you. He shook his head gently. And I couldn't have been heard without you. Their eyes met. Two worlds that had once clashed, now connected in perfect harmony. A week later, an international music academy offered Ethan a scholarship to train and perform professionally. It was a dream he had buried years ago. Clara was the first to tell him the news. He was silent for a moment, then said quietly, I don't know if I'm ready. Clara smiled softly. You were ready the moment you touched those piano keys. He laughed. You'll just miss me when I'm gone. Maybe, she said, smiling back. But I'll be proud too. As Ethan walked away that evening, carrying his old keyboard under one arm, Clara stood by the gate watching him go, proud, grateful, and changed. The girl who once mocked a janitor now understood something simple yet powerful. Real success isn't measured by wealth or applause, but by the hearts you touch. And as the sound of a distant piano floated through the air, she smiled, knowing his music and his kindness would never fade. A full year had passed since that unforgettable night. The night when a janitor sat down at a piano and changed both his life and hers forever. The Hidden Voices Foundation had grown into a worldwide movement. Young artists from poor neighborhoods were given instruments, scholarships, and a platform to be heard. Concerts were held in small towns and big cities alike, and everywhere they played, people spoke the same words. Because of Ethan Cole. Ethan himself had moved to Europe, studying music at a prestigious academy. But fame didn't change him. He still wore simple clothes, still smiled humbly, and still sent handwritten letters to Clara every month. He told her about the challenges of studying again, about his first orchestra performance, about the nights he played alone just to think. Clara kept every letter, tucked safely in a small wooden box. Each time she read one, she smiled, remembering the quiet janitor who had taught her what kindness sounded like. One crisp autumn evening, Clara stood backstage at the Grand City Concert Hall. The stage lights glowed golden, the audience murmured with excitement, and in just a few minutes, Ethan was about to perform his first international concert as a maestro. The moment felt unreal. She had watched him rise, step by step, from a silent worker in her mansion to one of the most admired musicians in the world. Yet, she knew that fame had never been his goal. He didn't play for applause. He only played because his soul needed to speak. As the lights dimmed, Ethan walked onto the stage, wearing a simple black tuxedo. The crowd erupted into applause, but his eyes searched only for one face. And there she was, sitting in the front row, smiling softly through tears. When their eyes met, the world around them faded. He sat at the piano and began to play. The music was something entirely new, a piece he had written himself, titled The Promise. The melody began gently, almost like a whisper. Each note carried warmth, love, and memory. It told their story without words. The laughter, the humiliation, the silence, the forgiveness, and finally, the friendship that had turned into something even deeper. Clara listened, frozen in place. The sound wrapped around her heart like sunlight after a long winter. Every note felt like a conversation. Thank you. I see you. I remember. As he played, she remembered everything. That first night when she had mocked him, the moment he sat at the piano, her disbelief, her guilt, and how he had looked at her afterward with eyes full of calm, not anger. She remembered the day she went to his apartment, how gently he had spoken about his mother, and how his music had healed something inside her she hadn't even known was broken. And now, here he was, the world listening, the room glowing with sound, and yet his heart was still the same. When the final note faded, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then the hall exploded into applause, louder than anything Clara had ever heard. People stood, cheering, clapping, crying. Flowers rained down on the stage. Ethan stood and bowed gracefully, but instead of soaking in the attention, he turned his head toward Clara. He smiled softly and mouthed, "For you." Tears streamed down her face as she clapped with all her heart. After the concert, Clara waited for him backstage. When he appeared, still glowing from the performance, she laughed through her tears. "You were incredible," she said, her voice trembling. He smiled. "I just played what I felt." She laughed. "You always say that." He stepped closer, his expression gentle. "Do you remember what you said that night, Clara? In the ballroom?" She blushed instantly. "You mean when I said, 'Play this and I'll marry you'?" He grinned. "That one." "I was joking," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "But maybe I wasn't." She looked up, eyes wide. "What do you mean?" He took her hand, his touch light, but sure. "When I played that night, I didn't just play for them. I played for myself, for the dream I thought I'd lost. But you gave me that dream back. You saw me when no one else did. And if I'm honest, Clara, I've been playing for you ever since." Clara's heart raced. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt warm, alive, full of all the words they didn't need to say. Finally, she whispered, smiling through her tears, "Then keep playing, Ethan, because I think I've been listening for you all along." He laughed softly, his eyes shining. "Is that a yes?" She smiled. "That's a promise." Months later, they married in a small ceremony. Nothing grand, nothing public. Just close friends, a few musicians, and a piano under a blooming cherry tree. Ethan played The Promise again as Clara walked toward him, wearing a simple white dress. No cameras, no audience, just music, laughter, and the quiet hum of love that needed no spotlight. As the melody floated through the air, Clara closed her eyes and thought about how far they had come. Two people from different worlds who had found each other through one act of courage and one act of kindness. When Ethan finished playing, he looked at her and whispered, "See, you kept your word." Clara laughed softly. "I said, 'Play this and I'll marry you.' And you did." He smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Then I guess the music finally found its happy ending." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood together, not as billionaire and janitor, not as performer and patron, but as two souls bound by something stronger than pride or status. A melody that had once begun with laughter had ended with love. And in that final silence after the last note, they both knew the promise was kept. Forever.